Martial arts and acting legend Chuck Norris has died. His family posted the news online earlier today. Norris redefined the role of the modern tough guy and action hero.
But the story we are about to tell is not the story of the tough guy. It's the story of a boy from Ryan, Oklahoma, who spent 86 years on this earth, carrying something he almost never let anyone see. A passage in his Bible he returned to more often than any other. A single verse he kept circling back to in his writing, in his interviews, in his faith work, across decades of public life. And the way he read that verse, the grammar of one small word at the center of it, tells you more about the private Chuck Norris than 1,000 hours of cable reruns ever could. This is not about a secret. It's about something stranger. It's about a verse that almost every tough man in the world has misread in the same direction. And what happens when you finally read it the other way? Carlos Ray Norris, born March 10, 1940, died March 19, 2026. Between those two dates sits a life the world thought it understood. It didn't. The silence. Nobody talked about. Here's what nobody tells you about Chuck Norris. Carlos Ray Norris is born on March 10, 1940 in Ryan, Oklahoma. Population just over 1,000 people. His father, Ray Norris, is a mechanic, a truck driver, and by Chuck's own written account, an alcoholic so severe he disappears for months at a time, sometimes years. His mother, Wilma, raises 3 boys essentially alone, in a house with no running water for stretches, in a town where poverty isn't a condition, it's the weather. I was very fortunate that I had a mother who kept me very close to the Lord in my younger days, and she was the apple of my eye, next to my wife. Chuck didn't talk about his childhood the way other celebrities talked about theirs, not for decades. What he did talk about, in his 2004 memoir, Against All Odds, and in a handful of quieter interviews over the years, was the silence. He described a childhood defined by absence, his father's voice, his own voice. He was so withdrawn as a boy that teachers flagged him as potentially disabled. He didn't speak in class. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't fight back when older kids targeted him. He described himself, in his own words, as a skinny, non-athletic kid with no sense of self-worth. Write that down. Because everything that came after, the championships, the career, the faith, runs through that sentence like a wire. He joined the Air Force in 1958. He was 18 years old. Stationed at Osan Air Base in South Korea, he began training in Tang-Soo-do on a military base in a country still scarred by war. The training was brutal. The instructors did not speak English. The climate was hostile. And for the first time in his life, the withdrawn boy from Ryan, Oklahoma, found something his body was good at. Within 2 years, he earned a black belt. Within 5, he was competing at the highest levels of American karate. He credited the discipline, in his own writing, with giving him something his childhood never had, a sense that he existed, a sense that he could take up space in a room, a sense that he was allowed to be seen.
Did you know that for over 300 years, from the founding of the American colonies until 1963, the Bible was a traditional textbook in our public schools?
The bravest thing a man can do is stand up for what he believes. He won the professional middleweight karate championship in 1968 and held it for 6 consecutive years. He retired undefeated. Not mostly undefeated. Undefeated. In 1969, he was voted the top karate fighter in the United States. In 1977, he was inducted into the Black Belt Hall of Fame as Fighter of the Decade. He opened a chain of martial arts schools. He trained Steve McQueen and Priscilla Presley. Bruce Lee personally invited him to play the villain in The Way of the Dragon in 1972. He was not an actor playing a fighter. He was a fighter who learned to act. And throughout all of it, the Air Force, the championships, the movie career, Chuck Norris did not drink. He did not smoke. He did not use drugs. He was, by every external measure, the most disciplined human being in any room he entered. But here's what he said himself, in print and on record. The discipline was never the whole story. In periods of my life, I did drift from the Lord. But the Lord never drifted from me. He stayed with me the whole time. He was a man who documented, who tracked, who kept notebooks. A man who wrote things down because the process of writing forced honesty. He published multiple books on faith over the course of his life. Against all odds, his 2004 memoir was structured around the tension between external achievement and internal faith. The Justice Riders, a novel he co-authored, a syndicated column that ran for years, often returning to the same handful of questions about manhood, responsibility, and what a man owes to the people he loves. Across all of that writing, one pattern kept surfacing. Chuck was not a man who wrote about faith from a position of easy certainty. He wrote about it from a position of slow, deliberate return. A man who drifted and came back. A man who, by his own account, had to learn how to receive something rather than earn it. When you understand that, you begin to understand why the passage he kept returning to in his writing was not an accident. It was the shape of a question he had been carrying for a very long time. The page he kept coming back to. Across his memoir, his columns, and his public faith writing, one chapter surfaced more than any other. Isaiah 53. If you know your scripture, your stomach just dropped. If you don't, stay with me. Because the reason this chapter mattered to a man like Chuck Norris is not theological. It's personal, and it is devastating. Isaiah 53 is known across virtually every Christian tradition as the suffering servant passage. It describes a man despised and rejected, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. It says he was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. The specific verses men like Chuck return to over and over are verses 4 through 6. The way a man returns to a wound that will not close. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities.
Our founding fathers quoted the Bible in their political writings more than any other source. Yet this has been the most banned book in public classrooms for the past 40 years.
The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Now read that passage again. But read it the way a boy who grew up watching his father leave would read it. A boy who decided, somewhere before he could even name the decision, that he was going to be the man who stayed. The man who absorbed the pain. The man who carried the grief. The man who did not flinch, did not break, did not show weakness, did not ask for help. Because asking for help was what weak men did, and weak men left. Read the chapter that way, and something happens to it. The description of the suffering servant stops being a description of Christ. It becomes a job description, a code, an instruction manual for what a real man is supposed to be. Bear the grief, carry the sorrow, take the stripes in silence. Don't let anyone see you flinch. That reading will make you extraordinary by any external measure, and it will hollow you out from the inside over the course of 60 years. If this is the kind of honest faith story that gets buried under the surface of pop culture, subscribe. Because what comes next is the part almost no Christian media outlet will say out loud. The direction of the wound. Here's what makes Isaiah 53 genuinely dangerous in the hands of a strong man. The grammar of the passage is very specific, and the preposition at the center of verse 5 decides everything. He was wounded for our transgressions, not by them. Not because of them in the sense of being punished for someone else's behavior. The word is substitutionary. It means in place of. It means someone else did the thing, and the person in the passage took the consequence on their behalf. That is the entire theological architecture of the Christian understanding of the cross. One figure takes what belongs to everyone else. The Hebrew preposition carries the same weight. The Greek translation in the Septuagint preserves it. Every major Christian tradition has built its understanding of what the suffering servant does around that one small word. 4. On behalf of. In the place of. But if you grow up absorbing pain as a survival strategy, if your whole identity is built on the refusal to show weakness, you will read that passage and hear something different. You will hear an assignment. You will think Isaiah is describing what a good man does, absorbs the pain, carries the grief, bears the weight without showing it. And you will spend your life trying to live up to a passage that was never asking you to live up to it in the first place. It was telling you that someone had already done it for you. That is not a small difference. That is the difference between a faith that lets you set something down and a faith that hands you a crown of thorns and tells you to wear it forever. What the toughest men can't set down. There is a pattern in men like Chuck Norris. You don't have to be famous to recognize it. You might be living it right now. It looks like this. A boy watches his father leave. Through alcohol, through literal absence, through rage, through silence, through whatever form the leaving took. The boy makes a decision before he has the vocabulary to name it. I will be the one who stays. I will be the one who does not crack. I will absorb whatever needs to be absorbed. I will be the wall everyone else stands behind. The boy grows up into a man who is, by any outside measure, admirable. He shows up. He provides. He doesn't complain. He doesn't drink the way his father drank. He doesn't leave the way his father left. He is, in every visible way, the opposite of the man who shaped him by failing. And somewhere around middle age, he starts waking up at 3 in the morning and not being able to go back to sleep. He starts walking out to a garage, or a truck cab, or a workshop, or a folded-down tailgate in an empty parking lot. He sits with something he can't name, a weight that has been there so long he has forgotten it is a weight. If he is a praying man, he might open a Bible. And there is a decent chance he will open it to Isaiah 53. Because Isaiah 53 is the passage that describes him, or so he thinks. Despised, rejected, acquainted with grief, bearing what others won't bear, wounded in silence so that others can have peace. He reads it as a mirror. He should be reading it as a substitution. The whole point of the passage is that there is one figure in human history for whom that description is the job description, and the reason that figure took on the description is specifically so that no other man has to. The cost of getting that backwards is not theological. It is a life spent carrying what was never yours to carry, in a silence that you believed was strength, and that was, in fact, its own slow form of leaving. A man can spend 60 years being present in the room and absent from his own life at the same time. His family will notice. They will not know how to name what they are noticing. They will call him controlled. They will call him stoic. They will say he is not a big talker. They will love him. And they will also know, on some level they cannot articulate, that the person inside the body has been somewhere else for decades. Wives notice first. then children, then grandchildren, if there are any. The pattern is so consistent across American masculinity that therapists have names for it: covert absence, presence without contact. The man in the chair at dinner who is not actually at the table. That is the real cost of reading verse 5 the wrong way. Wyland. In June of 1970, a telegram arrived for Wilma Norris. Her second son, Wieland Clyde Norris, Private First Class, 101st Airborne Division. A company, 2nd Battalion, 506th Infantry Regiment, had been killed in action in Thua Thien Hue Province, Vietnam, on June 3rd in the defense of Firebase Ripcord. He was 26 years old. He had been 11 days away from his 27th birthday. Chuck would later write that Wieland had told him, in the months before shipping out, that he did not expect to come home. He said it calmly, without drama, the way a man says something he has already decided not to fight. Chuck was 30 years old when the telegram arrived. He had just begun to transition from competitive karate into acting. He had a wife and young sons, and he became, in that moment, the oldest surviving brother of a family that had already lost so much to one war and now had to bury a son because of another. He would dedicate all 3 missing in action films to Wieland. He would talk about his brother publicly for the rest of his life. He would visit the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall. He would run his name through his writing over and over, the way men do when they cannot accept that someone is gone. But here is the thing about losing a brother when you are already the boy who decided he would be the one who stays. You add the weight of that grief to the pile you are already carrying. You do not set any of it down. You do not even know you are carrying it. You just get quieter. You get harder. You train more. You push further. You look more and more like the man the cameras will eventually love. And inside, the stack keeps growing. Wieland was one more thing Chuck read into Isaiah 53 the wrong way. One more grief to bear in silence. One more sorrow to carry as proof of his worth. One more wound to absorb so that his mother, who had already lost a son, would not have to watch her firstborn come apart. He carried it for 56 years. What faith actually asks here is the part that Chuck wrote about most directly in his own words. The Christian message, as he came to read it, was not a demand for more endurance from men who were already over-enduring. It was not a call for stoicism. It was not a code of silence dressed up in scripture. It was, almost embarrassingly, an offer. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Read that the way a man who has been carrying everything hears it. Not as poetry, as an instruction he cannot quite accept. Those are not the words of a faith that asks strong men to get stronger. They are the words of a faith that is trying, almost desperately, to get strong men to put something down. For a man who has spent his life being the one who does not put things down, that offer is not comforting. It is terrifying. Because accepting it means admitting that you could not carry what you have been carrying. It means admitting that the code you built your identity around was, in some fundamental way, a misreading. It means admitting that the thing you thought was faith was partly fear. Fear of being your father. Fear of being weak. Fear of needing grace. Because needing grace means admitting you could not carry it yourself. And admitting you could not carry it yourself means, in the private logic of the boy you used to be, that you were the kind of man who leaves. You were not that man. You never were. But the terror of becoming that man can drive 60 years of silence, 60 years of sleepless nights, 60 years of opening the same Bible to the same page and asking a question you are too afraid to let yourself actually answer. The question is always some version of the same thing. Is the offer for me? Specifically me? Not in general. Not for the crowd. For me, in this chair, at this hour, with this history. Chuck said, in his own written words, that the hardest part of his faith was not believing that God existed. It was believing that God's offer of rest was addressed to him specifically. The discipline that made him extraordinary was the same discipline that made it almost impossible for him to receive anything. That is not a Chuck Norris problem. That is a universal problem in the bodies of a million men who will never be famous, who will never write a memoir, who will never sit for an interview about their faith. Men who are, right now, in a garage or a parked truck or a kitchen at 3 a.m, reading the same verse and hearing the wrong preposition. What Wilma knew. Chuck wrote that his return to active faith came in 1989. He was in his late 40s, successful at the peak of his film career. And by his own written account, something was wrong inside him that external success could not touch. He described calling his mother. Wilma Norris had outlived a brutal marriage, raised 3 boys in poverty, buried her son Wieland in 1970, and emerged from all of it with a faith that Chuck has publicly said he did not fully understand until he was a middle-aged man. She had been praying for him for decades, quietly, without complaint, without pressure, in the way a mother prays for a son who has built a wall around himself that she is not allowed to climb, but can at least stand near. When he called her in 1989 and told her he was ready to come back, she did not make a speech. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not treat it as a victory. She treated it as a long-awaited homecoming, the one she had been preparing for in silence, for as long as he had been building his wall. Think about what that means. The toughest man in American pop culture spent the middle years of his life walking back toward a door his mother had been holding open since he was a boy. She never closed it. She never locked it. She never rattled the handle from her side to demand he come through. She just kept it open. That is another version of Isaiah 53, read correctly. Someone else carrying the waiting for you. Someone else absorbing the years of absence without punishing you for them. Someone else doing the work of the relationship while you were busy pretending you did not need one. Wilma Norris lived to nearly 100. Chuck eulogized her publicly. He called her, as he had called her for decades, the apple of his eye next to his wife. He said, in multiple interviews, that the faith he had was in a direct and unbroken line, the faith she prayed into him while he was busy trying to be someone who did not need it. He was an 86-year-old man when he died on March 19, 2026. He had outlived most of the men he competed with. He had outlived his mother. He had watched the culture turn his name into a meme and his image into a cartoon. He did not correct the meme. He did not defend himself from the cartoon. He had, by every public indication, made a kind of peace with the distance between the character the world saw and the man sitting in the chair. That peace did not come from being strong. It came from finally admitting that the kind of strength he had been performing was not in the end the kind the Bible had been asking for. Two questions remain. I don't have clean answers for either. The first is personal. How many men are sitting in the dark right now, in workshops, in garages, in parked cars, carrying something they believe they are not allowed to set down, reading the same page over and over, looking for permission that was there all along, in the grammar of a single preposition, in a passage they have been reading backwards their entire lives. The second is larger, and it's the one that keeps me up at night. If even the toughest man in American culture could spend decades misreading the most important passage in his Bible, if he could get the direction of the wound wrong, mistaking wounded for as wounded by, mistaking substitution for obligation, what else have we been reading wrong? What other verses have we turned into chains and called them crowns? What other silences are we praising as strength, when they are, in fact, the longest, slowest way a man can leave without ever leaving the room? Chuck said, in his own writing, that the version of him the public knew was a character, that the real man was quieter, less certain, more grateful, and much more tired than the meme suggested. That the faith he had was not the faith of a man who never doubted. It was the faith of a man who had doubted for a very long time, in private, with a pencil in his hand, and had slowly stopped trying to be the one who carried everything. He was not a pastor. He was not a theologian. He was a man who grew up watching his father leave and spent the rest of his life being the one who stayed. And somewhere in the middle of that life, he started to suspect that staying in the body was not the same as staying in the room, and that the faith he thought required him to absorb everything in silence was, in fact, the faith that was trying hardest to get him to stop. That is not a small change. That is a life. Carlos Ray Norris. March 10th, 1940. March 19th, 2026. He was the apple of his mother's eye. The older brother Wyland never got to come home to. The husband of Gina. The father of his children. The friend of Steve McQueen and Bob Wall, and a handful of men who are not with us anymore either. And, in the quiet of his own writing, a man who spent 60 years reading the wrong preposition, and a few years, at the end, reading the right one. If that question hit you somewhere, drop it in the comments. Which reading have you been living with? The one where the passage is describing you? Or the one where the passage is describing the person who already did it, so that you would not have to? Subscribe. Because the stories we tell ourselves about strong men are almost never the stories the men would tell about themselves. And the next figure in this series spent his life performing a different kind of certainty, and went to his grave hoping someone would eventually read his Bible the way he had stopped being able to. Some silences are strength. Some silences are the longest goodbye a man can say without ever leaving the room. The difference between them is one word, and most of us have been reading it wrong our whole lives. Rest easy, Chuck.